My mother-in-law wore a white dress to my wedding, but she had no idea what was coming. I'm getting married soon, and we're having a traditional wedding. I'm Indian. My fiancé isn't, but he was fine with having an Indian wedding. My mother-in-law-to-be asked me if she could wear white to our wedding. I said sure, and now my fiancé is really mad at me. He says she is going to try to steal the spotlight, and that she'll definitely show up wearing a long white dress, and it was very irresponsible of me to just agree like that. The thing is, I'm not going to be wearing a white bridal dress. I'll be wearing a traditional red dress that, due to the design lehenga, type of silk, and embroidery, is very distinctive. So even if my mother-in-law does wear a white wedding dress, it's not like it will be the same. Also, this may be dumb, but I don't really get what the big deal is if my mother-in-law wears white, even if I was also going to. As long as the groom doesn't get confused and marry the wrong person. How does it matter? Sorry if this is dumb, but my fiancé is really upset that I didn't stop my mother-in-law, and I just need some help understanding. I didn't mean to upset him. My fiancé knows what my wedding dress looks like. He has seen it. For those asking if my mother-in-law knows what my wedding dress looks like, I'm not sure. We have discussed what the wedding will be like. She hasn't been to an Indian wedding before, but I don't think we explicitly discussed what I will be wearing. I feel like she was confused when I said she is free to wear white, but that might be me projecting because the whole conversation was a bit confusing for me. Update. So, as you all suggested, I talked to my fiancé about why he was concerned. He explained that his mother had previously joked that she would wear white, and he had told her point blank that she wasn't allowed to do this. He didn't tell me about this because he didn't want to stress me out. Apparently, she has a tendency to steal attention throughout his childhood, which left some trauma. So basically, when I told my mother-in-law she could wear white, he was very upset that I had given permission when he had categorically refused. But he admitted it was wrong of him to get that upset when he hadn't shared any of the background information with me. We agreed that going forward, we would be better about communicating and made up. But then he wanted me to call my mother-in-law and tell her she couldn't wear white, or else she was banned from the wedding. Which I didn't really want to do, because that sounded like a surefire recipe for open hostility. And like I said earlier, I don't actually have a problem with my mother-in-law wearing white. I told him that he was welcome to tell her if he wanted, but he was insisting I have to tell her, because I was the one who gave permission. It was starting to turn into an argument, so I showed him this post and all of your great advice. This really helped. It helped him realize that even if my mother-in-law wore white, it wouldn't really stand out, at least not in a positive way. And he loved your idea of just not telling my mother-in-law that I wasn't going to be wearing white. So we'll probably offer to buy her a sari. But if she insists on wearing a white dress, we just won't stop her. Update 2. Given the way things turned out, it seemed fitting that I post this. On the previous poster's then fiancé. After Paya, not her real name, posted, a lot of commenters said I was wrong for not dealing with my mother myself. And I was especially wrong for getting mad at Paya without telling her anything. I didn't want to admit it, but the more comments I read, the harder it was to brush it off. I don't have a good relationship with my mother. She was the type to demand gifts on my birthday, because I wouldn't be here without her. For 18 years, I never got to open presents myself. Looking back, every event from my games to graduation was always about her. I always felt like my life and achievements were just an extension of her accomplishments. I think I suppressed my resentment because everyone around me always acted like this was normal. I didn't know how to cope with this. I just tried to get as far away from her as possible. I applied to the furthest university I could realistically get into and stayed far away, because anytime I had to go back home, it was the same story. At university, I was lucky enough to meet Paya, and for the first time, I started to like who I was. I didn't feel like I had to hide or play down my accomplishments or even my failures. And her family was so warm and welcoming. It felt like my childhood was just a nightmare of the past. I thought the best way to move past it was to just move ahead. I thought I would be able to handle it now, as an independent adult. After all, everyone says you're supposed to let sleeping dogs lie. And in my worst moments, I felt jealous of my wonderful fiancé for having such a welcoming, loving family, even though they were treating me like one of their own. I was ashamed of my mother's behavior and the ugliness of my resentment, so I pretended everything was fine and invited my parents to my wedding. Until this post blew up, I don't think I really understood how important my wedding was to me. I mean, obviously, the whole getting married to the girl of my dreams is huge, but I mean the actual details of the whole ceremony. I actually had a really clear vision of what I wanted in the wedding, but a combination of my childhood trauma and the notion that the wedding is the bride's day and not something men are supposed to care about made me unable to express it. I also didn't understand how badly I wanted an event that would be about me and not my mother. This unholy cocktail of repressed and suppressed feelings led to me unfairly lashing out at Paya when my mother tried her old tricks. At that moment, I forgot white wasn't the bridal color in Indian weddings. I just felt a cold sweat that another precious moment would be hijacked by my mother. I think Paya was shocked by my outburst because she had never seen me like this and made that post just to get some perspective. Neither of us imagined the ramifications it would have. I read every comment at least 10 times. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Unwanted memories kept invading my head, no matter how much I tried to bury my head in work or exhaust myself by exercising. I ended up having an actual meltdown that night. I was sobbing and crying. It was probably my ugliest moment. The next morning, I half expected to wake up alone and get a text that the wedding was off. Instead, incredibly, Paya stayed with me. She convinced me to go to therapy, encouraged me through those first few hellish sessions, and gave me space when I needed it. Therapy really helped. I was able to understand why I was feeling angry and upset and how to deal with it beyond just trying to ignore it. I apologized to Paya earlier, but it let me actually be honest with her about my family. It really transformed our relationship. I took over the wedding preparation with the help of my in-laws. This turned out to be great for all of us. I got to actually design my dream wedding. My mother-in-law later told me she was really relieved that we switched because my lovely Paya didn't really care any which way about the colors or flowers and had virtually no input on any of it as long as we were getting married. You might have realized from her post that she's a pretty nonchalant and easygoing person. She used to joke that she was fine with just exchanging garlands and calling it a day. My mother-in-law was also very encouraging and patient in letting me voice my input, and even found things I didn't think of but love, like riding a horse to the ceremony. We have a running joke that I seem more like her son than Paya because our tastes are so similar. And the actual wedding went really, really beautifully. Paya was ready to rescind my parents' invitations completely after everything, but her terrifying little sister suggested we invite them anyway as a final sort of fuck you, to show them I wasn't alone anymore, and no matter what they tried, this time things would go my way. I have to admit that did appeal to me, so we decided to invite them for the third day of the ceremony, and it worked even better than I imagined. First, it helped that my mother had no real idea what an Indian wedding is like, so when she showed up in a long white tulle ball gown, security actually thought she had the wrong address and didn't let her in. This was actually something I didn't plan, but the schadenfreude of seeing my mother fuming by the gate while other guests were let in was delicious. Secondly, compared to the embroidered silks and sleek satins of Indian clothes, my mother's ball gown honestly looked frumpy. Instead of stealing the show, she just looked like she didn't belong. This was accented by the jewelry, the matching churi and kungan, and earrings and bindis worn compared to her much more sparse look. Paya looked especially beautiful in her red lehenga koli, with intricate henna covering her hands and feet. I'm probably biased since she's my wife, but she has the most beautiful inky hair, and it looks stunning adorned with gudra and gold bilai on her braid. Indian brides also wore something called a mata patty, which looks like a crown. It definitely made her look like a princess. I actually forgot about my parents, my insecurity, and pretty much the rest of the universe because I couldn't stop staring at her. Then my mother tried really hard to interrupt the ceremony. First, she tried coughing, but luckily, Paya's aunt sitting next to her gave her a cough drop. Then she tried to initiate a conversation, but Paya's 5-year-old niece loudly said in that high-pitched voice of children that really projects, "Don't you know it's rude to talk during weddings? I'm 5, and I know that." I later learned that she had been coached to respond this way by my wonderful, terrifying sister-in-law. The third time she tried to interrupt, Paya's cousin, who had also been coached by my sister-in-law, jumped and loudly whispered that the food didn't seem to agree with my mother and needed to go to the bathroom immediately. I'm sure you can guess the implication, and basically push her away. After that, she stayed embarrassedly quiet for the rest of the ceremony. Throughout all this, the Pandichi never missed a beat, and everyone else acted like she wasn't there. At the afterparty, the difference between my mother and everyone else was unpleasantly accented by her ignorance of Bollywood/Tollywood dance moves, so she tried to refocus attention through conversation. She turned to my mother-in-law and started to complain about how hard it was to raise me. My mother-in-law, bless her heart, said, "However difficult children are, they bring 10 times as much happiness just by growing. Your son is such a wonderful young man. You must be so proud of him." My mother didn't like the direction of the conversation, so she turned to Paya and asked her if she was sure she wanted to be with me. This was after we had gotten married. Paya looked at her like she was a bit slow and said, "Why would I be marrying him if I wasn't sure?" My mother loudly asked her again if she was really sure because I used to wet the bed. I haven't done that since I was 8, but there she was, loudly announcing it for all and sundry. At that moment, I really hated her. It felt like there was something stuck in my throat, but no words came out. But Paya didn't have that problem. "You must be confused," she said. It was so confident, with a touch of concern, that my mother actually looked like she was confused. Then she raised her voice so it could be heard over the music. "Dear my mother, I know we are family now, but it's much too soon right now, or ever, for me to hear about your bedroom activities." Then she dragged me away to the dance floor while people started to stare at my mother. Stupidly, the first thing I said during our first dance as a married couple was that my mother was right. But because I'm the luckiest man alive, Paya just squeezed my hand and told me it happens when children are put under stress and that it wasn't my fault. That was pretty much the end of the problem. And I enjoyed the rest of my wedding dancing, eating food, and talking with Paya, and now my wonderful family. I did see Paya and my sister-in-law having another talk with my mother later, but I was too far away to hear anything. It couldn't have been too bad because my sister-in-law smiled a lot, and my mother didn't try anything new for the rest of the party. By the end of the day, my mother looked incredibly constipated, but she hadn't managed to ruin anything. I felt so relieved when I said goodbye, like a weight had just slipped off my feet and my knees felt weak. It was the first time in my life that she hadn't taken over something that was supposed to be about me. After that day, I haven't had any more sudden, invasive memories of the past. I feel so incredibly lucky to have married this girl. And I feel like I might have done something really stupid after that fight if I hadn't seen so many strangers telling me the same thing until I couldn't ignore it. So, in case anyone was still following this, I wanted to post a thank you.